Number: Marine veteran. Mocked by corrupt sheriff over bail money. Then the dashcam light exposed him. The rain came down in sheets across Shelby Springs, Louisiana, turning the already potholed streets into rivers of muddy water. Through this deluge, a tall black man pedaled an old mountain bike, his soaked backpack containing every dollar he had saved over 3 years. Just as Corbin Ward rounded the corner near the courthouse, 2 police cruisers veered sharply into his path. The impact sent him sprawling across the wet asphalt. Officers emerged, pulled the cash from his bag, and declared it seized under civil asset forfeiture laws. One of them laughed, a cruel sound cutting through the rain. "Welcome back to America, Marine." Corbin Ward pushed himself up from the ground, his face an unreadable mask, and locked eyes with the dashcam mounted on the nearest cruiser. In that moment, a silent war began. Corbin Ward had returned to Shelby Springs after 8 years away, 6 of them spent in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. The Marine Corps had taught him discipline, strategy, and the ability to survive when everything seemed stacked against him. But coming home had presented challenges no amount of military training could have prepared him for. His skin color made him suspect in the eyes of too many locals, and his military record, which should have earned respect, instead marked him as potentially dangerous in the minds of small-town law enforcement. He lived in a cramped apartment above the old hardware store on Maple Street, working construction jobs when he could find them, saving every penny with the methodical precision of a man who had learned to value resources in places where they meant life or death. The reason for his return sat in a cell at the Shelby Springs County Jail. Finian Ward, his 19-year-old cousin, had been arrested 6 weeks earlier on what should have been a minor traffic violation. A broken taillight had somehow escalated into resisting arrest and possession charges that no one in the family quite understood. The bail had been set at an astronomical $25,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million for the Ward family. Finian was the first in their family to get accepted to Louisiana State University, a bright kid with a future in engineering if he could just catch a break. Instead, he sat behind bars, watching his future slip away with each passing day. Audrey Constance watched the entire confrontation from her office window on the 2nd floor of the courthouse. As a clerk in the municipal court system for 7 years, she had seen plenty of injustices, but something about watching this man get robbed in broad daylight by the very people sworn to protect and serve struck a nerve she thought had gone numb. She was 32 years old. With auburn hair she kept in a professional bun, and green eyes that had lost much of their idealistic shine. After years of witnessing the system's failures, her own attempts to fight corruption had been met with threats, demotions, and eventually a resigned acceptance that kept her employed but increasingly hollow inside. Yet watching Corbin Ward stand up with such dignity in the face of such blatant theft stirred something she had thought long dead. Sheriff Wilfred Grayson ruled Shelby Springs like a feudal lord, his influence extending through every branch of local government. At 58 years old, with silver hair and the bearing of a man who had never been told no, he had transformed the sheriff's department into his personal kingdom. The civil asset forfeiture program had become his treasury, funding everything from new squad cars to vacation homes that somehow never appeared on his tax returns. He had judges in his pocket, prosecutors who looked the other way, and a network of officers who understood that loyalty to Grayson meant prosperity, while opposition meant destruction. Among Grayson's deputies, 2 stood out for very different reasons. Silas Monroe, a 35-year-old black officer who had transferred from New Orleans 2 years prior, played his role as Grayson's enforcer with apparent enthusiasm. What no one knew was that Monroe carried a second badge, one from the Department of Justice, and every brutal act he witnessed was carefully documented in reports that went straight to federal prosecutors building a case against the entire corrupt network. His cover was so deep that even his wife believed he had gone bad, a sacrifice that ate at him every night he went home to an increasingly cold bed. Zane Holloway, on the other hand, needed no cover for his cruelty. At 41, with arms covered in military tattoos that he claimed were from Special Forces service, but were actually from a stint in the National Guard that ended in dishonorable discharge, he was Grayson's true believer. He enjoyed the power, the fear in people's eyes, and especially the opportunity to put people he considered inferior in their place. When he had spotted Corbin Ward cycling through the rain with that backpack, he had seen an opportunity for both profit and entertainment. The confrontation at the courthouse steps had been no accident. Corbin had been carrying $32,000 in cash, money cobbled together from his savings, a loan from an old Marine buddy, and every cent his aunt could scrape together. $25,000 was for Finian's bail, and the rest was meant to be a down payment on a used truck that would let him start a moving business with his cousin once he was free. The money was legal, documented with bank withdrawal slips and loan agreements he carried in a waterproof folder. None of that mattered to Holloway and Monroe when they knocked him down and seized the cash. The next morning, Corbin stood in the courthouse clerk's office, water still dripping from his clothes despite having changed. Archibald Voss, a thin man in his 60s who had perfected the art of bureaucratic obstruction, barely looked up from his computer screen. "Civil asset forfeiture is perfectly legal," he droned in a voice that suggested he had given this speech many times before. "You can petition for the return of your property, but the process takes 6 to 8 months, and you'll need a lawyer, which I'm guessing you can't afford since you were carrying your life savings in a backpack." It was then that Audrey Constance made a decision that would change everything. She waited until Voss went to lunch, then quietly beckoned Corbin into a side office. "I can't officially help you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can tell you that your cousin's file has some irregularities. The arresting officer's report doesn't match the dashcam footage timestamp. In fact, a lot of dashcam footage from that night seems to have gone missing." Corbin studied her carefully, his Marine instincts evaluating threat levels and motivations. "Why would you tell me this? Because I've been watching this happen for 7 years, and I'm tired of being complicit through silence." She pulled out a manila folder, her hands trembling slightly. "These are copies of your cousin's arrest records. Note the date. Note that dashcam footage is automatically deleted after 90 days if not marked as evidence. Your cousin has been in jail for 42 days. You have 48 days to find that footage if it still exists." The alliance between Corbin and Audrey was born of necessity rather than trust. He saw her as another cog in the system, possibly setting him up for another fall. She saw him as a potential powder keg whose military training could turn their investigation into something violent and counterproductive. Yet they needed each other. Audrey had access to the courthouse systems and knowledge of where bodies were buried. Metaphorically speaking, Corbin had the skills and determination to go places and do things that a court clerk could never risk. Their first meeting after hours took place in the abandoned Methodist church on the outskirts of town. Audrey arrived 15 minutes late, having driven in circles to make sure she wasn't followed. Corbin was already there, having arrived 2 hours early to scout the location and set up multiple exit routes. The mutual paranoia would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. "There's a pattern," Audrey explained, spreading out photocopied arrest records on a dusty pew. "Young black men mostly. Some Hispanic. All arrested on minor charges that somehow escalate. All have their bail set impossibly high. Most can't pay, so they sit in jail. The few who can pay cash get stopped before they make it to the courthouse, and their money is seized. It's a perfect system. They either rot in jail or lose everything trying to get out." Corbin traced his finger along the dates. These go back 3 years. That's when Grayson became sheriff. He ran on a platform of being tough on crime. What he meant was being tough on anyone who couldn't fight back. The plan they hatched was dangerous, but necessary. The sheriff's department kept backup drives of all dashcam footage in a storage facility behind the main station. The official policy was to delete after 90 days, but Audrey had heard rumors that Grayson kept certain footage longer, either for blackmail or protection. Getting in would require someone with the right access codes, which changed weekly, and the ability to navigate the security system. This was where Silas Monroe entered their story, though neither Corbin nor Audrey knew it at the time. Monroe had been watching Corbin since the seizure, recognizing in him the perfect catalyst for the federal investigation. When Corbin approached him at a bar, pretending to be drunk and bitter, Monroe played along, commiserating about the department's corruption while secretly recording every word. It was only after 3 such meetings that Monroe made a decision that could have ended his career and possibly his life. He told Corbin a half-truth. "I'm not who you think I am," Monroe said, ensuring they were alone in the bar's parking lot. "I can't tell you everything, but I want Grayson gone as much as you do. Maybe more. Corbin's hand moved instinctively to where his service weapon would have been. You're wearing a wire. Number. But I am documenting everything. Not for Grayson. For people who can actually do something about him. The partnership that formed was uneasy. Built on mutual need rather than trust. Monroe could provide access to the storage facility and inside information about Grayson's operations. Corbin and Audrey could be the visible face of the investigation, drawing attention and creating pressure while Monroe remained in the shadows. What none of them knew was that Bridget Hale, a dispatcher who seemed to fade into the background of the department, was playing her own game. Bridget Hale was 45 years old, with mouse-brown hair and the kind of face that people forgot immediately after seeing. This invisibility had served her well over the years, allowing her to listen to conversations people assumed were private and access systems people forgot she knew about. She had been skimming from the seizure funds for years, small amounts that no one noticed, building a retirement fund for the day when the house of cards inevitably collapsed. She saw Corbin's investigation as that day approaching and began taking steps to protect herself. The night they made their move on the storage facility, everything that could go wrong did. Monroe had provided the access codes and disabled the alarm system for a 15-minute window. Corbin and Audrey, dressed in dark clothing with ball caps pulled low, made it inside without incident. The drives were exactly where Monroe said they would be, organized by date in a climate-controlled room that spoke to their importance. Audrey found Finian's arrest date quickly, pulling the drive with shaking hands. "We need to go," Corbin whispered, his military instincts screaming that they had been in one place too long. "Wait," Audrey said, grabbing drives from several other dates. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. These are all the arrests from the last 6 months with missing footage." They made it out of the building, but as they reached Corbin's borrowed car, floodlights blazed to life. Zane Holloway stood beside his cruiser, weapon drawn, a smile playing at his lips. "Well, well, breaking and entering. That's a felony. Though I'm betting we'll find more charges once we search you. The smart play would have been to surrender, to take the arrest, and fight it in court." But Corbin had spent too many years in places where surrender meant death. He grabbed Audrey and dove behind a dumpster as Holloway opened fire, the bullets sparking off metal and concrete. The drive scattered across the wet pavement. The one with Finian's footage, skittering, under Holloway's cruiser. "Run," Corbin hissed to Audrey. And she did, clutching what drive she could grab. Corbin went the opposite direction, drawing Holloway's attention and fire. Military training kicked in as he moved from cover to cover, not trying to escape but rather leading Holloway away from Audrey. He almost made it to the tree line when a figure stepped out of the shadows. Bridget Hale, holding a taser, her usually vacant expression replaced by cold calculation. The voltage dropped Corbin instantly, his muscles seizing as he hit the ground. Through the haze of pain, he saw Bridget pick up the scattered drives, including the one that had rolled under the cruiser. She pocketed them with practiced efficiency, then spoke into her radio with a panicked voice. "Officer needs assistance. There's been a shooting at the storage facility." When backup arrived, the scene was chaos. Holloway claimed he had caught Corbin breaking in and had fired when the suspect charged him. Bridget backed up his story, saying she had arrived to find Corbin attacking Holloway. There was no mention of Audrey or the drives. Corbin, still recovering from the taser, was arrested and processed, his military service record doing nothing to help him now. Audrey made it home, but knew it was only a matter of time before they came for her. She had managed to grab 3 drives, but without Finian's footage, they proved nothing except that she had stolen government property. She sat in her apartment, curtains drawn, trying to think of a way out that didn't end with her in a cell next to Finian, or worse. It was Monroe who provided the solution, though it came at a terrible cost. He visited Audrey at 3 in the morning, using his badge to bypass her building's security. "They're going to arrest you tomorrow," he said without preamble. "Grayson wants to make an example. But there's another way." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Monroe revealed that while the drives contained footage, the real evidence was in the dashcams themselves. Every cruiser had a manual backup system, a separate hard drive that activated when certain emergency lights were triggered. It was a failsafe most officers didn't even know about. Installed after a lawsuit 5 years earlier. The footage from Corbin's money seizure would still be there, as would dozens of other incidents. But we need to trigger the backup system on Holloway's car specifically, Monroe explained. And the only way to do that is from inside the vehicle, while it's at the station. That's suicide, Audrey said flatly. The station is crawling with deputies. Not tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, Grayson is holding his monthly poker game. He, Holloway, and 4 other senior deputies will be at his lake house. The station will have a skeleton crew, mostly dispatchers, and 2 patrol units. What Monroe didn't tell Audrey was that he had already contacted his federal handlers. The raid was scheduled for 72 hours from now. All they needed was to survive until then and preserve the evidence. But Grayson had moved up his timeline, planning to eliminate loose ends before any investigation could gain traction. The poker game was a trap. Grayson had learned about the federal investigation through a contact in the state police. He knew Monroe was undercover, knew about the impending raid, and had decided to clean house. The poker game was his alibi, while Bridget and 2 deputies he had brought in from another parish handled the wet work. Corbin was released on bail posted by an anonymous benefactor, actually Monroe using federal funds. He walked out of jail to find Audrey waiting in a rental car, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "We have one shot," she said. "Tonight, or we're all dead." They drove to the abandoned church to plan, not knowing that Bridget was already there, waiting in the shadows with a syringe full of enough fentanyl to kill 3 people. She had orders to make it look like a murder-suicide, the disgraced Marine veteran killing the clerk who had betrayed him before taking his own life. The story would write itself, and any investigation would die with them. But Bridget had made one mistake. She had taken Corbin's phone during his arrest, but hadn't destroyed it. Instead, she had been monitoring his messages, looking for other conspirators. What she didn't know was that Monroe had installed a tracking app, and he was watching her location in real time. When Corbin and Audrey entered the church, Bridget made her move. She emerged from behind the altar, syringe raised, her usual mousy demeanor replaced by predatory focus. Audrey saw her first, screaming a warning that gave Corbin just enough time to dodge the initial lunge. The syringe scraped across his arm, tearing his shirt but missing the vein. The fight was brutal and brief. Corbin's training gave him the advantage in combat. But Bridget had desperation and a complete lack of moral restraint. She pulled a knife from her boot, slashing wildly while trying to create distance for another attempt with the syringe. Audrey grabbed a candlestick from the altar, bringing it down on Bridget's wrist with a crack that echoed through the empty church. The syringe fell, rolling across the floor. Bridget dove for it, but Corbin was faster, his boot coming down on her hand as she reached for it. The sound of breaking bones was followed by Bridget's scream, then sudden silence as Monroe appeared in the doorway, his service weapon drawn. "Federal agent," he said, his voice carrying an authority that had been hidden for 2 years. "Nobody move." The revelation should have been shocking, but at that point, Corbin and Audrey were beyond surprise. They had been pawns in so many games that finding out Monroe was federal seemed almost anticlimactic. What mattered was that he was on their side, at least for now. "We need to move," Monroe said, zip-tying Bridget's hands behind her back, despite her broken fingers. "Grayson knows about the raid. He's cleaning house tonight. There are already 2 bodies at the lake house. Deputies who knew too much. He's coming for you next." "Then we end this now," Corbin said, his Marine training taking over. "We go to the station, get the Dashcam evidence, and broadcast it before he can stop us." "That's insane," Monroe protested. "We should wait for backup. Your backup is 3 days away," Audrey said quietly. "We'll all be dead by then." The assault on the sheriff's station was not something any tactical manual would recommend. 3 people against a fortified position with unknown opposition should have been suicide. But Corbin had learned in Afghanistan that sometimes the impossible became possible when the enemy didn't expect you to be that stupid. They took Bridget's dispatcher codes and Monroe's cruiser. At exactly 11:15, when the skeleton crew would be changing shifts, Corbin drove the cruiser straight through the station's front entrance. The reinforced push bar on the front of the vehicle shattered the glass doors, and the car continued into the lobby, stopping only when it hit the front desk. The crash was tremendous, setting off every alarm in the building. Monroe and Audrey entered through the chaos. Monroe badge out, shouting about a terrorist attack to add to the confusion. The two deputies on duty ran toward the crashed cruiser, weapons drawn, leaving the dispatch center momentarily unguarded. Audrey slipped into the dispatch center, her fingers flying over the keyboard she knew so well from her years of coordinating between the courthouse and sheriff's department. She accessed the emergency broadcast system, typically used for amber alerts and severe weather warnings. Instead of a missing child or tornado warning, she uploaded the dashcam footage Monroe had managed to pull from the backup system earlier that day. Every television in Shelby Springs, every radio station, every cell phone with emergency alerts enabled, suddenly received the same message. Video of Zane Holloway and Silas Monroe, before his federal role was known, beating suspects, planting evidence, and most damningly, audio of Sheriff Grayson discussing the murder of a previous deputy who had threatened to expose the civil forfeiture scheme. The response was immediate and overwhelming. State police, who had been kept in the dark about the federal investigation, descended on Shelby Springs like an invading army. Federal marshals, their timeline accelerated by the broadcast, arrived in black SUVs with warrants for everyone from Grayson down to meter maids who had participated in the scheme. The raid on Grayson's lake house was anticlimactic. They found him trying to burn documents in a barrel behind the house, still in his poker clothes, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Holloway tried to run, making it almost to his boat before a state police K-9 unit brought him down at the water's edge. The dog, a German shepherd named Justice, in what seemed like cosmic irony, held him there until officers could apply handcuffs. The aftermath was measured in months rather than days. The federal investigation, bolstered by the evidence Corbin and Audrey had uncovered, revealed a network of corruption that extended through 3 parishes and involved over 40 law enforcement officers, 6 judges, and countless civilian accomplices. The civil asset forfeiture program was suspended indefinitely, and millions of dollars in seized assets were ordered returned to their rightful owners. Corbin Ward was released after 87 days in custody, 3 days before the dashcam footage would have been automatically deleted forever. He had lost weight, his eyes carrying a hardness that hadn't been there before. But he was alive and free. Louisiana State University, facing a potential lawsuit and a public relations nightmare, not only reinstated his enrollment, but offered a full scholarship as compensation for his ordeal. The relationship between Corbin and Audrey evolved slowly, built on shared trauma and mutual respect rather than conventional romance. They didn't have a first date so much as a series of meetings with lawyers, federal agents, and investigators that gradually became coffee afterward, then dinner, then simply being together because being apart felt wrong. Monroe's situation was more complicated. His role as a federal agent was exposed during the trials, making him useless for undercover work, but also making him a target for every criminal organization in the South. He was relocated to Washington, where he trained other agents in deep cover operations, his marriage a casualty of the years of deception despite his wife's eventual understanding of why he had done what he did. Bridget Hale turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealing the full extent of the corruption and her own role in skimming funds. She served 3 years in minimum security, writing a tell-all book that was optioned for a movie that was never made. She disappeared after her release, some saying she went to Mexico, others claiming she was in witness protection, but nobody really caring enough to find out. Archibald Voss, the bureaucratic obstacle who had refused to help Corbin initially, surprised everyone by testifying against Grayson with meticulous records he had been keeping for years. It turned out his obstruction had been self-preservation, not complicity, and his detailed documentation of every irregularity helped secure convictions. He retired immediately after the trials, moving to Florida where he spent his days fishing and trying to forget. The town of Shelby Springs itself struggled to recover. The sheriff's department was placed under federal oversight, with new officers brought in from outside the parish. Trust in law enforcement, never strong in certain communities, was completely shattered. It would take years, possibly decades, to rebuild what Grayson had destroyed in his pursuit of power and wealth. On a humid Thursday morning, exactly 1 year after his money had been seized, Corbin stood at the same spot where Holloway and Monroe had knocked him from his bike. The pothole that had filled with water that day had been repaired, part of a municipal improvement project, funded by the seized assets returned to the community. Beside him stood Audrey, no longer in her courthouse clerk attire but in jeans and a t-shirt advertising Ward and Ward Logistics. The moving company Corbin and Finian had started with the compensation from their lawsuits. "You know we don't have to stay here," Audrey said, her hand finding his. "We could go anywhere." Corbin considered this, looking at the rebuilt sheriff's station with its new transparency policies posted prominently in the window, the courthouse where Audrey had once worked now under new management, the streets where he had been hunted now patrolled by officers who at least pretended to serve and protect. "No," he said finally. "This is home. Broken as it is, it's home. And somebody needs to stay and make sure it doesn't break the same way again." Finian pulled up in one of their moving trucks, honking the horn and grinning. He was heading to Baton Rouge to finish his degree, the engineering program waiting for him like a promise of better things. On the side of the truck, freshly painted, were the words Ward and Ward Logistics. Moving forward, not backward. Audrey squeezed Corbin's hand, a gesture so small and yet so significant. They had not had dramatic declarations of love, no passionate kisses in the rain, no conventional romantic moments. Instead, they had chosen each other in small ways every day since the nightmare ended, building something solid and real from the ashes of corruption and violence. "Coffee?" she asked, producing a thermos from her bag, the same one she had carried as a clerk, now repurposed for their new life. "Always," he replied, accepting the cup she poured, the gesture domestic and comfortable. They stood there, watching the morning traffic build. Citizens going about their lives with a freedom they might not even realize had been fought for and won. Some recognized Corbin and Audrey, nodding respectfully or occasionally offering thanks. Others, newcomers or those who wanted to forget, passed by without acknowledgement. Both responses were fine. They hadn't done what they did for recognition. A new sheriff's cruiser drove by. The deputy inside young and nervous, probably fresh from the academy and hyper-aware of the department's history. The dashcam on his vehicle was prominently displayed, a new model that uploaded directly to a federal server, impossible to delete or manipulate. It was a small thing, a technical upgrade, but it represented so much more. "The Fisher family wants us to move them to Houston next week," Audrey said, transitioning to business with the ease of someone who had learned to compartmentalize trauma. "That's a big job. We'll need both trucks. Finian can help before he leaves," Corbin replied. "He needs the money for books anyway." They walked back to their office, a small building they were renting with an option to buy. The American dream filtered through the lens of hard-won realism. On the wall inside hung a framed photo from the federal courthouse in New Orleans, showing Grayson being led away in handcuffs. It wasn't a trophy so much as a reminder that justice, while often delayed and never perfect, was possible. The phone was already ringing when they entered. Someone else needing to move forward, to start over, to leave something behind, or head toward something better. Audrey answered with professional warmth, while Corbin checked the trucks, ensuring they were ready for whatever came next. That evening, as the sun set over Shelby Springs, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful for such a complicated place, Corbin and Audrey sat on the porch of the small house they were renting together. Not living together, not exactly, but not living apart either. It was complicated, like everything else about their relationship, but it worked. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come back?" Audrey asked, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "Every day," Corbin admitted. "But then I think about Finian still in that cell, about all the others who would still be trapped. About you still standing at that window watching injustice and unable to do anything about it." "I could have done something," she protested weakly. "You did do something," he corrected. "The moment you decided to help me, you did something. We both did." A car drove by, music playing too loud, young people enjoying their freedom in a way that would have gotten them arrested under Grayson's regime. Neither Corbin nor Audrey complained. The noise was the sound of liberty, messy and imperfect but real. "We should probably talk about what we are," Audrey said eventually, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Corbin considered this, his military mind wanting to classify and categorize, but his heart understanding that some things resisted easy definition. "We're partners," he said finally. "In business, in justice, in whatever this life throws at us. Is that enough?" She leaned against him, her head finding that spot on his shoulder that seemed designed for it. "It's more than enough. It's everything." They sat there as night fell completely, the lights of Shelby Springs twinkling below them like stars that had fallen to earth, and decided to stay. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new tests of the fragile peace they had helped build. But tonight, they had each other, and they had the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. Finian's truck pulled into the driveway, back from a late delivery, and he joined them on the porch without being invited, understanding that he was always welcome. The three of them sat in comfortable silence, survivors of a war most people would never know had been fought. Victors in a battle that had cost them all something but given them something precious in return. The knowledge that they had not backed down when backing down would have been easier. "We did it," Finian said suddenly, as if the reality was just hitting him. "We did," Corbin agreed. "And we'll keep doing it," Audrey added, her voice carrying a determination that suggested this was not an end, but a beginning. The dashcam that had recorded their persecution had become the instrument of their salvation. A mechanical witness that couldn't be intimidated or bribed. It was a small thing, a standard piece of equipment that most people never thought about. But it had brought down an empire of corruption. There was a lesson in that, Corbin thought, about how the smallest lights could illuminate the darkest corners if someone was brave enough to turn them on. As they finally went inside, Audrey's hand found Corbin's again, a touch that promised without words that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not a conventional love story, perhaps, but something stronger. A partnership forged in fire and tempered by justice, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. The last light in the Ward logistics office stayed on late into the night. Three people planning routes and schedules and futures, the business of moving forward in every sense of the phrase. Outside, Shelby Springs slept uneasily. A town forever changed by the courage of a few who refused to accept that corruption was simply the way things were. And in the sheriff's station, the new dashcams recorded everything, silent sentinels against the return of the darkness, their red lights blinking steadily like hearts that would never stop beating for justice.